the Supersonics. I don't know if that was the name in English, but when I was very young, that was one of my favorite TV shows, and everything worked so seamlessly, but it was kind of the opposite to the Flintstones. So we had the Flintstones and the Supersonics, and the Supersonics was the future 40 years ago. And this future seems to be still far from us, that all the technology will solve all of our problems. But in some way, when they talk to me about autonomous vehicles, I still feel that that's a thing of the future. But then I start reading and finding information around it, and I see trials and things happening in many places, and the industry making big announcements, like in 2018 there will be commercial operations, or others says in 2035, but there are some companies that are saying that just this year they will have commercial operations, and we have trials in different places, and I feel, well, it's not a thing of the future, but it's gonna be a sustainable future and a better future for all of us, and it will do what we want in sustainable mobility, have efficient, green, have also the safety, which is so important, but also the inclusion in this new technology, which is one of the revolutions happening at this point. So that's what we're going to try to discuss today, about how ready we are for it, how this can be better for all of us, and how this will move forward. So the panel that we have today, and it's really, I just met them today, but I had some conversations with them in the recent past. We have Karina Ricks, that is the Director of Mobility and Infrastructure in Pittsburgh. Actually, it's a new agency, it's a new department, because it was not existent, and it was a result of moving the city of Pittsburgh with a the Smart Challenge Pit, which happened some years ago. And actually, when you read about Pittsburgh, well, they have about 120 autonomous vehicles roaming around at this point. So it's a city where the vehicles are there. So Chigo's gonna tell us a little bit about the story, what is going on, and the public reactions, and also the government point of view from this thing happening in a city which is transforming itself after some decline in jobs and population, but it's coming back. That's Karina Ricks, our presenter. And we have in the panel Mr. Stephen Cotton, who is the General Secretary of the International Transport Workers Federation. It joins more than 700 trade unions representing 19.5 million workers in 150 countries, talking from his point of view of this revolution, and especially for the trucking industry, which is the main commercial workers working in this field. We have also in the panel David Ward, who's Secretary General of the Global New Car Assessment Program, that has been working on the field of road safety for some years, and always have something to say, which is always good to have him back in transforming transportation, because his point of view is always very, very interesting, and probably you will hear over the panel very, very controversial. And we have Stacy Cook, which is Senior Associate with Cambridge Systematics, and works on planning and policy mainly, and helping authorities making transition to this new mobility happen. And particularly one program that really struck my eye is the Virginia Automated Vehicle 20XX strategic plan. And the X's, as I understand, are because we really don't know when it's going to happen. There is uncertainty behind it. So we have this great panel in front of us, and we will have an opportunity to hear different positions. At the beginning, the panel was supposed to be a debate, people in favor and people against. But talking with the panelists, well, that will need a lot of preparation, and sometimes taking positions that may not be that comfortable. So I prefer them to be, all of them, in their comfort zone, and talk from their experience and their ability and the serious concerns and opportunities and benefits that may come from this disruption. And so I will open the panel with the presentation that comes from the city of Pittsburgh, and Karina will help us with that presentation. That will be just the first 10 minutes, and you have the podium, or wherever you want to present from. Mechanism to pass the slides.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. So I'm Karina Ricks. I'm from the city of Pittsburgh. Just so I know the audience a little bit, if you don't mind. How many of you have been to Pittsburgh? Any? Oh, wow. Terrific. Thank you. Wonderful. How many of you have... how many have never heard of Pittsburgh before, ever? Yeah, okay. I appreciate your honesty. So, Pittsburgh is a city in western Pennsylvania. It's about a 4-hour travel by car from Washington, D.C. It is sort of, yes, on the way to Detroit. It's a former industrial city, was once one of the premier cities of the United States. Very, very strong industry in steel, strong industry in oil, strong industry in banking and financial institutions. But it obviously has seen some changes in the recent decades, has seen some decline in the city. We are fortunate to have two of the premier institutions, educational and research institutions in the United States, Carnegie Mellon University, which is well known as being a research in robotics and in computer and intelligent learning. And then the University of Pittsburgh, which is one of the national and world leaders in health, and among very many other things that institution participates in. And so we're very pleased that we actually are a test bed, are a place where autonomous vehicle technology not only in some respects was born, but also is one where it's learning. And so we've heard people in the industry talk about why Pittsburgh, why are these robot cars operating in Pittsburgh? And the industry will say, well, we are sort of the double black diamond of operating in an urban environment because we have hills and valleys and tunnels and extraordinarily bad drivers that they also have to work together with. So autonomous vehicles are really not new in Pittsburgh. They've been in the news quite a lot in the last year or more, but they're not new. In fact, we had our first autonomous vehicles operating in the city in 1986, when Carnegie Mellon University first brought out the very first box truck that was operated through intelligent technology. Then the university participated with General Motors in the DARPA Urban Challenge, and that was one that the CMU, the Carnegie Mellon University submission, was one of the winners of that campaign. In September of 2016, perhaps you heard, Uber announced that they would begin operating autonomous ride-sharing service in the city of Pittsburgh. And so that really sort of put us on the map, so to speak, with autonomous technologies. Soon after that, just a few months later, in 2017, we were one of 10 designated proving grounds for autonomous technology in the United States. And today, in fact, we have 6 autonomous vehicle operators that are in the city now. And so we really have grown this industry and have a number of testing exercises going on in the city streets together with other users of the roadways there. So we are now a year plus beyond the initial launch of the Uber operations in our city, which really opened up this technology to the general public and to general consumption. And we have some lessons learned now as a city in relation to this private industry operating on our streets. So when they launched, Uber initially brought just 4 vehicles that were going to operate in the city. They said that their intent was to eventually have 100 vehicles operating on the city streets. Only the most loyal, sort of the habitual Uber users would be then permitted to go into the autonomous vehicles, and they had to volunteer. There had to be a conscious act that said, I accept going into a vehicle that is operated by robotic technology. And so you had to actually opt in. There was no fare to riders when they first began this, because in fact the riders were part of this scientific experiment that was going on to see how this is. And so because they were participants in this experiment, there was no fee to riders, and there was, of course, 2 human beings in the front seat of the car, a driver and a data analyst that went together on every ride that these vehicles took. 1 year later, more than 1 year later now, we actually have absolutely no idea how many autonomous Ubers there are operating on our city streets at any given time. Uber does not share that information with the city of Pittsburgh. We estimate that Uber alone has somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 vehicles, but that's just a guess. We really don't know how many autonomous vehicles they have on our city streets. Nor do we know how many trips have been taken by residents, workers, and stakeholders in the city of Pittsburgh in these autonomous vehicles. We estimate, again, that there's been tens of thousands of trips made by patrons of Uber in these autonomous vehicles, but again, that data is not shared with the city. We also quietly, sort of without announcement, Uber stopped requiring people to volunteer into this grand experiment of autonomous vehicle mobility in the city. And so now, if you are to come to the city and you have the Uber app on your phone and your trip happens to be in the area where the autonomous vehicles operate, you may just automatically be assigned to one of these vehicles. You, of course, can decline, as you can decline a ride with any personed trip that you want to take, but you do not have to kind of acknowledge that you're part of an experiment and taking place in this. But they also very quietly started charging you for those rides as well. So a ride in an autonomous Uber in the city of Pittsburgh now is the same price, and you'll pay the same as you would in a conventional vehicle. And so that was sort of done, and so, so we have to ask ourselves, where are we now with our relationship with Uber? Is this still testing and experimentation and learning, or is this now business? Have we already crossed that threshold into conventional business practice? That's something that we're wrestling with in the city. Some other things that we've learned is about how the public reacts to these vehicles. We have, as I said, scores of them out on our streets. A survey was taken by actually our bicycle advocates just 6 months after the autonomous Ubers launched in the city. And they asked, it was a voluntary study and it was not statistically significant. So these are not scientific numbers that you're looking at. It was a voluntary survey. And so there was some degree of self-selection in the participants, but it was a very well participated in study. So there was a large sample size that resulted in these. And what we found was just 6 months after these vehicles had been in our cities, 46% of respondents said that they had had some kind of direct interaction with these autonomous vehicles, either as a passenger in one or as a fellow traveler on the roadway with these vehicles. Another 11% said, well, I don't know, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, I'm not sure. So perhaps more than half of the people that participated in the survey had actually had some experience with these vehicles. And of those, then they asked them, how do you feel about a vehicle operated by a human being versus a vehicle operated by a robot? And the respondents, only 30% of the respondents said that they felt human drivers, they felt safe or very safe operating in a street together with a human behind the wheel. That's not very good. That doesn't speak well for all of us who drive vehicles. Only 30% of us actually trust the person next to us on the streets. But almost 60% felt safe or very safe operating alongside an autonomous vehicle. So there was actually a very high degree of confidence, which was very surprising. This is 6 months after these vehicles had arrived on the streets. And more than 68% of respondents said that they were completely satisfied with allowing our public streets to be the test bed for this technology to operate in the city, even though it's still developing. They felt that that was fine. Some of the things that we found, and that the industry will also report, is that there were some benefits that we're seeing from these autonomous vehicles. Again, it's a small number of vehicles relative to the total fleet in the city, but even so, the bicyclists really like them because the vehicles keep this minimum passing distance between them so they don't feel crowded or threatened when the autonomous vehicles are passing the bicyclists. The pedestrians like them because the cars are programmed to not go immediately when the light turns green, but to pause a minute to see, enable the pedestrians to make themselves known to the vehicle before they go through the intersections. They adhere to the local speed limits, which pedestrians love and fellow drivers hate. They are non-aggressive, so they don't tailgate, they don't run up on you, they don't use hand signals to express themselves when driving. And they have so far a pretty good safety performance rating. On the other hand, what we're finding is that they still have a tough time really recognizing the urban environment. So some of the vehicles continue to be confounded by buses and trucks, and they confuse these very large objects on the street with walls and with other obstacles that need to be avoided or to be shied away from. They don't understand some of the social context. So in Pittsburgh, we have this crazy thing that's called the Pittsburgh left, where drivers will let the oncoming vehicles turn left in front of them before they go through the intersection. And of course, the vehicles don't know social norms and those kinds of things. And so they don't really understand that sort of social element of operating on the streets. The vehicles, of course, rely on three-dimensional mapping of the areas in which they operate in, which is then complemented with LiDAR and other sensors that they use. And so the three-dimensional mapping is very, very specific in telling them where exactly the lanes are until we from the city change those lanes. If we're doing construction, if we're doing a road diet, if we're doing other changes, all of that mapping then is no good, and the vehicle doesn't necessarily understand why it's being directed in a different way than its map tells it to. They have limited coverage because of this mapping requirement. They don't actually serve the whole of the city. They only serve the areas that have been mapped. And so far, despite this promise that autonomous vehicle technology is going to be affordable and ubiquitous mobility for everyone, there's been no cost savings. There's been no reduction in transportation costs for the people of Pittsburgh as a result of this. So this raises a lot of questions for us in the public sector of how do we manage change? How are we to react to and channel this technology that's in our city for good, for the social purposes that we in the public sector are actually brought in to lead? And so one thing which you heard earlier from Robin Chase is that we've been also working on what we call the social contract, not only with autonomous vehicle providers, but actually with the transportation networking companies and the ride-sharing companies, which is what is this mutual benefit that we need to work toward? You are operating on our public streets. What is your sort of obligation to be a partner with the public in this? And some of the things that we're asking through this is that, first and foremost, that they share their data. These companies, the transportation networking companies, frankly know more about our city and more about the travel demands of our people and where those gaps in mobility and access are than we do. And it's very hard for us to meet the needs of the people without this kind of data. And so that data sharing is necessary. Not everything, we don't need all the data that we have. Frankly, we wouldn't know what to do with it. But specific data sets are what we want so that we can understand our city at least as well as they do. Oh, I'm being called. Okay,
Yes.
we'll go quickly. Career advancement is very important. They need to participate in this professional change. And so career changes, they need to provide wheelchair accessible vehicles and electric vehicles so that we can improve our outcomes that way. And then quickly, Pittsburgh has 6 mobility goals that we really target a lot of our investments in, and so we need the autonomous vehicles to participate in this. 0 traffic deaths. This is something that our mayor has committed to. By 2030, we will achieve no deaths on the streets of Pittsburgh, and we need them to be a part of that. We need them to provide access so that every household in the city of Pittsburgh can access fresh fruits and vegetables, or open space, or quality education within a very short travel time of home, without the requirement of a private automobile. We need to keep costs low. Transportation plus housing plus energy in the city of Pittsburgh are substantial costs. We need them to help us keep those costs below 45% of household income for every income quintile. And we need them to participate not in satisfying every trip that's made with another vehicle trip that's not going to help us, but that very short distance trips of less than 1 mile, should be really best accomplished through walking and bicycling. And we need them to be a part with us in encouraging that physical mobility. We need them to serve our resiliency goals. We are one of the 100 resilient cities. We have a goal of a 50% reduction in transportation emissions by 2030. So this means the electric vehicle charging, the electric vehicle fleets is necessary to us. We need them to reduce the vehicle miles traveled. We have targets for that. So this can't just be replacing motor vehicle travel with more motor vehicle travel, but actually making a change. We need them to help us reduce stormwater runoff, which means not continuing to expand the impervious surfaces of our streets. And we need them to plan for the future of work. Just in closing, this is the sort of population trajectory of Pittsburgh. We are a city who experienced precipitous population decline associated with transformative technologies. The steel industry collapsed, and so did our city. So we lost almost half of our population in a very short period of time. We're not going to do that again. We're going to be smarter and brighter and more diligent this time than we were the last time, and we're going to really understand where this technology is taking us so that we don't replicate the past. This technology raises a lot of questions for us that we haven't answered yet, but hopefully my fellow panelists will, which is that—
we will make additional questions.
Yeah, we'll make additional questions, yeah. In a recovering city, do we chase this shiny object, this great new market opportunity, this distinction of autonomy, and just let it go free range into our city so that we can distinguish ourselves, or do we manage it to some particular outcome? Having experienced the loss of one industry, how are we going to make sure that this doesn't just displace more workers in the change of autonomous? Are we really prepared for the financial disruption that is going to come along with this autonomous disruption? So changes in liquid fuels tax and parking revenues and other sources of funding that are very, very important to city operations. And are we really ready yet? I think the answer is no.
So we have one position. We are not ready, but with these trials in Pittsburgh, what is happening in California, what is happening with the smaller vehicles in Paris or taxis in Singapore, and so many places around the world where the industry is kind of leading in that direction, but then the cities need to respond to that, and the private sector as well. Well, Stacey have been asking these questions to the state of Virginia and to others, and she has been looking forward to understand and find ways. And the question is, are we ready, and how in the general context, and what type of things are you recommending from the consultancy so it's possible to move in this direction?
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Is everyone awake after lunch? All right. Thank you very much for having me today. My name is Stacey Cook, and I do work with Cambridge Systematics. Our firm works in data analytics, planning and policy, and software. I focus on planning and policy myself. And so what I'll bring to you today is a perspective that's fairly broad, because what we help our clients do is face change and answer the questions about the challenges they face. And so we have been supporting the federal government with its automated vehicle initiatives through pilots for connected vehicles, through developing planning guidance that they've been sharing with states and regions. Been helping work with states such as, just right here, Maryland and Virginia with their strategic plans for connected and autonomous vehicles, down to regions. Just finishing up a series of workshops with Centralina COG down in Charlotte, North Carolina, to help them build the capacity and understanding of the potential impacts, what's real and what's not, right? Clearing the hype of autonomous and connected vehicles, and helping them start to get a sense of how it will impact the areas in which they work and what power they have. So we really have that client perspective. And one thing we've done recently is in 2016 for the NCHRP, the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, we conducted a survey. And I think it really goes to the question that you're asking. And that was, how ready are we? We surveyed about 50 states and MPOs, that was about 50 respondents total, asking questions about that readiness. And one of the most interesting answers was that about 6% saw themselves as really pushing the edge. They're preparing, they're planning, they're conducting studies, conducting pilots. But another 14% thought they were emerging. They were on the tail of those cutting edge folks, but about 35% said they weren't doing a lot, and nearly 40% said they'd really not even begun to think in any real context as far as developing plans, assessing their programming approaches for autonomous and connected vehicles. I think if we conducted that study today, even 1 year later, we'd see different answers. I happen to know of a lot of states that are developing strategic plans, trying to identify the roles and responsibilities of the federal government versus the state governments, the MPOs. We're really seeing a lot of folks realize that they need to start thinking about this yesterday. And so I think, are we ready? I think the technologies at least in their study environments, may be way ahead of our ability to handle those technologies within the context of our real world environments when it comes to being able to handle them from a legislative perspective, motor vehicle registration, how they operate within our roadways, what our expectations are of them, how we plan for them, how we adjust our programming, right? Where do we invest our funds? So I think the technologies may actually be ahead of the agencies themselves because the technologies can move very rapidly, and that is not a bureaucratic speed. The pace at which they're advancing is very quick. So to answer the question in a different way, are we ready? I think the business case for automated and connected vehicle technologies is certainly made. We've been debating over lunch the NHTSA study that attributes about 94% of crashes to human error. That may not be the right number, but certainly advanced technologies can help reduce those those crashes. We see congestion on our highways that these technologies may be able to submit. And I think ultimately there's significant opportunities with having automated fleets that are connected, that are electric, and that have a ride-sharing economy to addressing many of the issues that we see. So readiness can be looked at from a lot of perspectives, but ultimately we need to make sure we're asking the question of what problems are these vehicles going to solve? What problems do we want them to solve? And how do we make sure we're coordinating and collaborating across all levels of government, with the private sector, with academic partners, in order to make sure that the results of the technologies, whether they're one by one or as a group in a fully autonomous vehicle, actually making sure that they're meeting the goals that we've set out for our community as far as equity, economic development, safety, environmental wellness, and all those other goals. So I think that's my answer to that question in the short. David?
Again, the response is we are advancing, but there is a long way to go, and especially the long way to go seems to be on the government and regulation side, not in the technology side. What do you respond to that, David, from your experience in road safety and testing so many vehicles around the world?
Okay, thanks. Well, I represent Global NCAP, which is the umbrella for NCAPs around the world. The first started here in the US back in the Carter administration under Joan Claybrook. And there are 9 programs around the world that build on regulation. They're not regulatory. They provide consumer information that exceeds performance above regulation. And probably I would say amongst the NCAP community, you probably have a community of knowledge that is probably about the best on how quickly technology penetrates through vehicle markets anywhere. And first thing I want to say is I'm in favor of technology in a big way. I'm all in favor of autonomous cars. But, I mean, I'm glad the debate isn't pro or anti. I think the answer to the question, are we ready? Absolutely not. They're not ready. We're not ready. And we don't have to worry about this because there's an awful lot of phrases thrown around, like disruptive. Actually, if you look at all of this technology change, it's evolutionary. It's overwhelmingly evolutionary. The vehicle fleet is a big, heavy lump, and it changes slowly over time. It took 100 years to get 1 billion motor vehicles on the planet, which is what happened in 2010. Now we're accelerating that. Probably by a little time after 2030, we'll have 2 billion motor vehicles on the planet, and they will be overwhelmingly 99% or maybe 95% conventional vehicles. Look at how long it's taken for electric vehicles to penetrate. The vehicle fleets in countries, even in high-income countries, are taking longer to rotate. People are holding on to them longer. No signs of disruption there. You'd have to have Tesla or someone produce an extremely low-cost, totally, fully functioning autonomous vehicle tomorrow to have any significant impact 20 years from now. It would have to do really dramatic things, which is change the purchasing patterns of the lower income vehicle purchases faster than we've ever seen in human history. I don't think it's going to happen at all. So in fact, this is maybe good news. We have time to get this right. We have time to put in place the sort of social protections and so on that we're going to need, and we always have needed with vehicles. They are the most heavily regulated products on Earth, and there's a reason for that, because they're playing with fire with kinetic energy.
They are manned.
Sorry?
They are handled by humans.
They're handled by humans, but I mean, coming back to this thing about, the issue of, NHTSA did a study some years ago, which is the oldest cliche, or a recent, very boring cliche, that 90% of road crashes, road fatalities are caused by human error. That's very like what the head of General Motors in the 60s, when they were arguing with Ralph Nader on the Hill over there, said, we've got to fix the nut behind the wheel. It was a terrible blame the victim approach, and it underscored a completely failed approach to road safety, which was driver's education. The new version is, we'll fix the nut by the wheel by taking the nut away. That may or may not work, but it ain't gonna happen fast. In the next decade, we're in the World Bank, the Sustainable Development Goals. That's the agenda for an institution like this, yep. Right? The forecast, Soames Job, who's speaking at a parallel session just the other way, he reckons that on current trends, between now and 2030, there'll be 21.7 million more road deaths, 850 million more serious injuries. All of this has nothing whatsoever to do with that. It won't have any impact on that at all. And the problem with the 90% thing is it's actually the wrong question. It's not about whether it's a human error. And that study actually was based on police reporting of last reported cause in a chain. So it actually doesn't tell you very much. If the road layout is lousy, if it creates conflict conditions, if the vehicles enable far too easy acceleration, all those things, there are plenty of other human errors, and they may actually be the designers fundamentally. So it's totally the wrong question. And what we're all working on is the safe systems approach, where you try and actually maximize out the safety performance of the underlying infrastructure and the vehicles. And the final point, I've only got one minute left, I hope we have plenty more time, is right now there are a whole load of technologies
you will have more.
which are really effective. The most important, which is boring here because it's already mandated, electronic stability control, anti-skid technology, can work in all classes of vehicles. Only about 40% of the world's new vehicles do not have it. So number one priority in vehicle safety is that. Let's get electronic stability control all pervasive through the vehicle fleet. Second, autonomous emergency braking. These are the anti-brake emergency braking systems. The EU is about to regulate this next year for city, interurban, and pedestrian. Here in this country, there's a voluntary agreement to try and encourage this. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has done an estimate of how quick, under the voluntary agreement, AEB will penetrate the US vehicle fleet. With an existing technology, with it already happening on the market, it won't reach 80% until 2035. And then finally, last but not least, is a technology called intelligent speed adaptation. That is a system that reads the signs, the posted speed limits. It uses maps to correlate with that, and it drives the car at posted speed limits. It will be a regulatory item for the EU in a few months' time. If you maxed out right now AEB, ESC, and intelligent speed adaptation, and you've got a lot more work on much more forgiving and better road design, which we are seeing at city level all over the place, you will gain 90% of all of the benefits that autonomous vehicles may or may not give us by 2040 plus. So my argument is, no, we're not ready. There's no rush. We can get this right. But be careful of assuming this disruptive thing, and also that all of the things are just a given win. It's not. There are a lot of issues about whether all these technologies will really work, and we've got time to sort it out.
Thank you. Well, happening at this moment, WRI is launching a report on how to advance Vision Zero, where it has not been adopted. It's being launched in the atrium at this moment. I really encourage participants to take a look and take it, because there are many other things that we can do, but we are discussing here the vehicle of the future, or the present in the case of Pittsburgh. And one of the concerns that is always hanging there is what will happen with the workers, because we have so many people employed to, and especially trucking industry and commercial vehicles like the transit vehicles, and there's this concern also behind it. Probably having a person from the International Workers Federation representing that interest, it's going to be very, very interesting to hear that point of view.
Okay, thanks, Dario. Good afternoon, everyone. So first, it's a pleasure to be invited to the World Bank. I sit here representing approximately 19 million transport workers from every mode of transport. And as you can imagine, automation is about as controversial issue as you'll ever find. But automation means many different things in many different parts of the transport network, the global supply chain. So the question about automated vehicles, I'm going to come straight out and say, no, we're not ready, mostly because there's so many questions. And this week, and the Sustainable Mobility Project is about bringing all the elements of society to tackle what are stereotypical views. So if I take a conversation to the dock workers of the ITF, they very clearly dislike automation. But there's also a consumer demand for just-in-time issues and a quicker delivery. So somewhere in this dichotomy of views, and if I look at the global picture, if we look at the major cities, mega cities in Asia, one of their biggest challenges is transportation. And part of that conversation is, are the cities built right? Do we have the right modes of transport? So in the ITF, we're having this debate, as difficult as it is, to try and come up with sustainable position. And it may be different in transit, it may be different in taxi driving. Many of our taxi drivers are not the biggest fans of Uber for many, many different reasons. And they do not like them, strangely. And the conversation is not about competition, but it's about background checks, health and safety checks. And the bigger conversation is, what is an industry norm? I will come on to trucking, but because there's a demand for cheaper and cheaper transportation, particularly when it comes to freight, the pressure tends to go on the working men and women. And that question is a conversation that has to be run parallel to the automated future of transportation, because we need to have answers to secure. What is the general reaction if you go and visit the transit here or a bus depot in India? Fear of the unknown. Working men and women want to know what their future is and what secure opportunities there are. And we very much hope that through these processes with the World Bank and sharing different and quite different views, we're able to come up with a humanitarian approach to the future. You know, when I look around the room and I see everyone on their mobile phones, I was one of those that believed technology would make our life better. How many of you are on call? I know we're very serious leaders in this room, but how many of you are on call all of the time now because of technology? So the conversation for all of us is, what do we want from technology? How are we going to manage it? And how are we going to ensure that our societies are sustainable from a moral perspective? So I wanted to touch on truck driving because, strangely, there's a global shortage of truck drivers, and we work very closely with the employers' associations to find an opportunity to give more credit to those jobs. And if we talk about what is automation, and we talk about, and there's like 5 different grades of what is automation, and I'm not going to go through it now, but there is a lack of understanding what we talk about automation, and we should clarify what we're talking about. We've said with the employers we need to pay more for our truck drivers and give them a better profession. And that's part of the transition to the future. And I would argue that's the same in all modes of transport. But it's a conversation that has to be dealt with in a tripartite model. Governments, responsive governments, governments that aren't... Oh, so should we prepare?
Entering some muddy waters there.
I think it's appropriate to talk about a vision of what the future should look like and how we're going to pay for it. Because one of the issues for all transport workers is, how long is my job? If you talk to any worker, and I would challenge you in whatever capacity it is, you want to have a secure job with a good salary and build an opportunity for your family and your future. Those are historical rights of workers throughout the decades, through the Industrial Revolution, and all of these challenges are the same for us. But we have to find a new way in this society where the rich, I'm going to be a little bit political, don't get richer and richer, but we create a platform for everyone in the society. So for me, this is a perfect opportunity to discuss how we do it. We have to do it in partnership, and we have to give the answers to tomorrow's workers, the young people, women, all of those people in our society that don't get a fair opportunity. So I'm going to finish just before my time and lay out challenges to you about how do we tackle our society going forward. Yes, we can embrace technology, but we've got to be sure that society will profit from it, not be disadvantaged as a result. Thank you.
So we have a general statement from the participants in the panel on the great presentation we had from Pittsburgh. And my take of this first round is, oh, this is Jetson stuff. It's still in the far, far future because we need to answer all these questions, but the industry is moving fast and things are happening there. So how we are able to match these two really challenging things? We need to answer so many societal needs: safety, security, jobs, green, all the things that we work in sustainable mobility. And the industry is moving really fast. And the question will be, we just let this happen and see, we'll fix it later? That's one approach, Stacy?
So I'm happy to answer or take a first stab at that question and welcome my peers up here too as well. So with autonomous vehicles, what most of us hear through radio, TV, articles, in the news, it's all promises and threats, right? They're either going to kill us all or save us all. But everything in the world is more nuanced than that, right? And so ultimately, our role as professionals and all of the partners that we work with in our cities, in our states and federal governments, with the private industry and those that are testing, is to identify those opportunities and to identify those potentially very dangerous impacts that could be a real problem, such as cybersecurity or vehicles entering the roadways before they're ready to be tested. Waymo just announced very recently that they're going to be testing in Phoenix, I believe, on the roadways, no driver. they've decided that the driver has been falling asleep too much, they increase the safety risk. So it's not something that's happening to us. This is not a hurricane that we can't stop. So I think personally and professionally, to realize that we have power and we have control if we choose to take it. And so I think that's why we're working very closely with our clients to prepare and ask difficult questions and do research and do analysis and encourage coordination and collaboration and decision-making so we can get to some points where we have federal regulations as far as the expectations, where we can have state regulations, and so we can actually set expectations for these vehicles so that when they're implemented, whether it's individual technologies that we're already seeing today or full, completely autonomous vehicles, that they're actually serving the needs of our communities, not just happening without our control. And so there's potential within our governments and the people of the nation actually having a voice of this. One of the words that's getting tossed around a lot is preemption. We don't want to stop vehicle technologies from advancing, and so the federal government and state governments have been talking about issuing legislation, and some already have. For example, Texas, for example, has already issued some preemptive language that its cities can't set rules and regulations about the expectations of autonomous vehicles. The federal government is talking about doing something similar in order to prevent states and cities from setting their own expectations. So I think the point of preemption is that we have to make sure that we have, somebody's phone is going off. Someone can stop that. All right. But basically, that we actually take regulatory control of this issue so that it allows us to advance technologically, advance the opportunities that we have to gain benefits, but also to make sure that we're really working hard and taking the time to get up to speed so that we can implement this technology in a way that's safe.
But then you are pointing that let's continue moving kind of in the same pace that the technology and the industry is moving and try to find things. Or do you favor that approach of moving forward?
I think that we need to take some baby steps. Personally, I think that testing in real-world conditions is important, but cities like Boston, cities like Portland are identifying those testing locations. Some cities, such as Michigan, Ann Arbor at the university, have already created fake cities to test in, but I do think they do need to test in real-world environments, but not without consent of the people themselves to be tested upon, and not until those technologies are incredibly proven.
Okay, I understand. So, but David, you mentioned that we probably need to do many things that are more effective in the realm of road safety, but probably in also in green and efficient and access rather than taking this road. I want you to stress which are these things, and you already mentioned, you listed them in your previous presentation, but it's like this is distracting us from the real debate.
That is happening to some extent. I just point you. I think actually we've reached peak hype, and we're actually coming down from peak hype on autonomous cars. Just a couple of days ago, one of the main market research companies did a new estimate of the number of autonomous vehicles, and actually they're moving it backwards. The previous study, it was 53 million vehicles on the road by 2035. Now it's 33 million by 2040. Volvo's experiment, they're reducing the numbers. We have a lot of interaction with the industry. Some of it, the best interaction we have, it's all off the record.
Okay,
and
but we are record here.
Yeah, but what I can tell you is, and this is particularly with the suppliers, and there's a very interesting power shift going on in the auto industry where actually the suppliers have the real knowledge of what's going on. OEMs are sort of actually just badging things. When you talk to those people, they're pretty cautious about the pace of all of this. And there are still some very significant technical issues on how these systems, how robust they are, repairability of all these systems, vulnerability to the slightest little ding, a bicycle backs into it, knocks out the sensors, what happens? There are all sorts of issues about periodic updates, or like our phones are going to need to periodically update. How do we know that they are being handled properly? We're living in an environment where there's massive trust problems. We're living in an environment where major companies, and I very much admire VW for their safety work, but a company like VW is foolish enough to blatantly cheat in an environment like this. Why do we think that any other kind of company might not do that in all this very complex area of technology? There are vast issues to tackle with all of this. But I think actually what we may end up, I was talking about peak hype, we may actually overshoot too much the other way.
I hope so.
And what we need is old-fashioned evidence-based policymaking. And then in the testing environment, what you do is you trust, but you verify. And there will be plenty of opportunities, I think, to manage this social transition. But I think we're not helped when we're constantly painted this picture that very, very quickly we'll have a huge fleet of autonomous vehicles that will be doing everything better than now. In fact, in the transition phase, it may be worse. And even if they were the majority, we simply don't know that they will be delivering all the benefits we're talking about. And particularly, I mean, my concern is low middle income countries where this is really marginal, really marginal. But I mean, if you take a different issue than safety, efficiency, it's just blithely asserted that autonomous vehicles will reduce congestion. Actually, there's been some interesting sort of experiments. The analogy is having a car with a chauffeur. People who have a car with a chauffeur use the chauffeur to do all sorts of extra runs. There is a really, very much like your objective, is get miles driven down. It may be exactly not that. And, okay, he's a slightly strange guy, but old Mr. Musk from Tesla slightly gave the game away when his sort of billionaire's bias against mass transit came out, and that his vision is lots of tiny little private pods running around where human beings don't have to meet each other. Now that's not...
You're talking about Elon Musk?
Yeah. I mean, that was an incredibly foolish statement. And actually what's interesting is, maybe the challenges of building mass-produced vehicles are hitting home with him because he's struggling to get his lower-cost electric vehicle actually out into the market. And I think, all this sort of degree of hype, let's get real about this. And any time it's a sort of California slogan about disruption, all the rest of it, let's just tell them all, cool down. The reality is, as I explained, technology takes quite a long time to filter through markets, and we have the time. I think all the comments here are actually on a common frame, which is we need to make sure that this transition, rather than disruption, is managed in a way that actually societally we maximize the benefits that technology will bring. And I prefer to talk about pathways to greater autonomy. At the moment, the problem is, and this is the real, maybe the final point, is the distraction issue is to focus always on this end point of these wonderful magical vehicles that do everything. And what it does is it distracts policymakers. A wonderful example of that, last month we had a great meeting in London at the EBRD and a meeting of parliamentarians. I'm very pleased Francois Bausch, Minister of Luxembourg, was there. The following day, our colleague Barry Shearman asked a minister in Parliament, what about the issues? In the UK, we have stagnant progress in road deaths. It's starting to pick up again. He challenged this. Answer was, don't worry, that's why we've got driverless cars coming. Well,
Okay.
And that is
So
political.
that's no solution.
That is political distraction. To make something finally very provocative point, you'll have to allow me my extra minute. Is there is a problem with some of the sectors in the automotive sector. There's been a long history of talk about some wonderful future and delay the more immediate gains that are right in front. Perfect example of this. For years, the auto industry in this country effectively bankrupted itself by lobbying against small incremental improvements in the CAFE standard. And what did the companies do to justify this? They had a wonderful fig leaf called fuel cell vehicles. And fuel cell vehicles are just coming around the corner. And they hoodwinked the politicians to think that fuel cell vehicles are coming, and they lobbied like hell. An army of lobbyists, exactly the same guys lobbying now against things like mandating autonomous emergency braking, who'd have a heart attack if there was a US proposal to have intelligent speed adaptation here, which is actually the nearest thing you can get to accelerating public acceptance of autonomous vehicles. Will they do that? Hell no. They love the story about autonomous vehicles because it's a massive distraction from real-term, near-term, evidence-based policy making.
Now, you have evidence, Karina, and you may tell us about the experience there. And one of the sides of the experience that really I love is that the people was bored with these cars because they were too slow, because they were respecting speed limits.
Yes, yeah, there was that. But I do want to respond though to the contention that, you know, settle down, there's plenty of time. As the policymaker on the panel, I'll tell you that we are masters of procrastination. So if you tell us...
I want to repeat that. We are masters of procrastination.
Policymakers are masters of procrastination. We also are extraordinarily slow when it really is time to move and address these kinds of issues. And so to tell me that there's no need to worry, we've got years and years before any of these things are really going to affect us, just puts us even further behind really being able to be proactive about the way that these vehicles are deployed, the way that they're used, who they are benefiting, the impacts that they have. There's an American saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think that the worst outcome that we can have from this autonomous vehicle revolution is that we continue to have the same patterns of travel, perhaps even worsening patterns of travel, now simply without a driver in the driver's seat. So we do need to get ahead of it. I don't care if it's 20 years or 30 years. I can guarantee you the public sector will be too late to the game anyway once the industry is ready. We do know that there is a tipping point, that we perhaps are on the flat edge of the change curve right now. But when it becomes to that rapid adoption, that is probably the only time that public policymakers will really be paying attention. And at that point, this massive transformation is just around the corner, and we're too late to do that. So I didn't answer your question at all. But
No, but I was surprised because I was in this transportation camp this Saturday, and one of the things they mention again and again is that the people may not be excited in driving in being in these vehicles because they respect the speed limits. So we kind of, as human beings, like not to respect speed limits that are there to save lives, not the other way around. And in that line of thinking, professional drivers are the ones that are trained and oversight and look forward to really do their job in the best condition possible. And this automation is promising to improve their job or to completely change it. What are the types of debates you're having in that regard?
So that's a great question and quite broad. So in reality, historically, we sell as human beings our labour by units of time. And there's a question where all of us in this room, put your hand in the air if you don't know who your employer is. You know who you have a contract with. Yes. And the questions about Uber, and you know, we don't take Uber, but we do talk to taxi drivers. And some of our drivers will be taxi drivers one day and also have the Uber app because they need to create enough business. And I think for us, it's a question about labour cost. And we sit here in DC in fabulous conditions. Autonomous vehicles have a cost. And the cost of those depends on the labour of where you're actually operating. So it's a global question about what's going to happen for the future of workers, whichever status or whichever education, because then there's another conversation. And we talk quite openly with many governments who are kind of progressive in problem solving and sharing their problems. And I'll use Singapore as an example because they value their image as a cutting edge country. And they are talking to their education systems about how do we change our education to make sure the next generation are able to respond to a highly digital, completely different employment environment. So for us, there is a question, and I'll come to the professional drivers. Part of the reason we work with the employers about trying to get more people to be truck drivers is because it's not clear what is the timetable for this future. Why do we have a conversation with the different institutions that run major cities is because trucks are part of the congestion question, part of the pollution question, and there's radical moves in certain cities to tackle when trucks can go into town, what times, which is pretty antisocial if you're a truck driver.
Yep.
But there's also a question about the unit of value for the time they can charge, because we as consumers, and I kind of think sometimes, and it's pretty crucial that transportation drives the global economy, but it's kind of invisible. And we kind of want to drive it to the lowest possible cost, which then means it isn't an attractive profession to be a truck driver. And we're seeing some of these automation issues come in some of the better paid transportation jobs, aviation, automated baggage systems. We're seeing progression. Now, the question again is, how do we engage as a workforce to make sure we're fit, we have a quality of life, because my perception of technology is to make our lives better, how to make sure that the consumers get what they need, but in a way that treats everybody equitably and fairly. So the truck drivers, it's difficult when we say, we see in Europe, and we've done a very big study in Europe about subcontracting, and sometimes you see 20 levels of subcontracting on trucking. And many of the truckers own their own vehicles and have to do so many hours to pay their debts, and then you're talking with a fatigue question. And then you need to have legislation about rest hours, when you can drive. And what do we find? We find that governments don't actually police some of those regulations. So we come full circle with this conversation. Yes, we're not against new technology and new ways of working and new ways of protecting society, but we have to have perhaps a different way of looking at it. Governments, policymakers, urban cities, if you look at all the UN figures, we're going to have more urbanisation. But our cities aren't ready for more urbanisation unless we find a way to pay for the infrastructure, and also to make, we talked in the break earlier about, do we want 24-hour cities? I think most people would say yes, because that's the drive. But how are we going to sustain that and pay for it and make sure it's safe for women, for young people? And how are they going to have their opportunity to be part of that next exciting challenge, but with some parameters that protects ourselves from being too greedy and not sharing equitably?
Yes, well, this morning we have Robin Chase presenting a snapshot of the 10 principles for livable cities, which include that this autonomous vehicle revolution, or evolution better, to put it in that way, it is necessary that at least in dense cities, these autonomous vehicles are shared vehicles, are not owned by individuals, as a matter to reduce the eventual increase in vehicle kilometers traveled that can happen if it is not that way. But there's the other side of the coin, is that an individually owned vehicle that is automated, the people will want to get revenue out of it as well. So as it's happening already in ride-hailing. So there are many questions, and I really appreciate the panel to raise them up. But it seems that we are not going to procrastinate, and we'd rather don't do that in procrastinating in moving this agenda forward. Is here. Many of the things are there, and we probably shift the conversation from the high level of automation, the complete automation, to some things in automation that may help the goals that we are wanting to have. We want green, we want safe, we want access, and we want efficient transport, which is our mantra in the sustainable mobility for all work that we, together with the World Bank and many other organizations, are doing. So now I would like the audience to step up and make comments and questions, very short, and hopefully address to a particular member of the panel, so we can have this participatory event as we like. Please, your name and affiliation. The mic is on now. Hopefully.
I don't know.
Yes, it is.
My name is Bill Orleans, and reference was made to the leaders in the room earlier. I am not a leader in this room. For Ms. Ricks, I don't understand the problem. Presumably, the city of Pittsburgh owns its public rights of way. Any entity that wishes to profit from utilizing Pittsburgh's public rights of way should have some requirements to meet some standards that the city would impose upon it. You referenced the social contract after you said that Uber won't give us any data. Don't let Uber operate on your streets until they give you data. There has been a momentum built over the course of the last, I don't know, 6, 8 years. Uber has bullied, and it's ill, but mainly it's Uber, has bullied and psyched us out to presume that they can do any damn thing they want, anywhere they want, and they're doing it. And maybe recently they've had some problems, but they're still doing it. They're still. I have a question with regard to a general presumption. Very little skepticism I heard today, but I'm glad I heard it. On Sunday, I heard someone suggest that in fewer than 3 years, in a few years or fewer, he said. I didn't quite understand that.
Okay.
That's what he said, and I didn't understand that. But we're going to see, wherever we're at, automated vehicles on the streets, operating on the streets. And on Tuesday, I heard someone suggest that whenever that eventuality comes, those of us who live in urban, dense environments won't be permitted to drive a car, the expectation being that it will be only so-called autonomous vehicles. This momentum is rolling. We seem to be rolling along with it or riding along with it. And when a question was asked on Monday, is it inevitable? The presenter, who spent 15 minutes suggesting that it was inevitable, said, no, it's not inevitable. And I was very pleased to hear him say that. It's not inevitable. Yesterday, there was some skepticism raised in a session.
Kindly wrap up. Yeah.
I would just ask the people in this room, have we been psyched out? Is it inevitable that we have to live in an Uber world that's autonomous, in which the vehicles are all autonomous?
It's a
Take
very
a poll.
good question. I will take the other two questions, and I really like to address the very good point that was made by the participant to our panelist. Please, Maria.
I'm Maria C. Gomez, and as a former policymaker, I cannot agree anymore with Karina's point and suggest that the title of this very wonderful session, and I thank you all for your participation, should not be whether we are ready, but how do we get ready? This is happening, and I will take my vote on the question, but how do we manage it and how we make that technology fit our goals is what the intelligence part of the transformation of transportation is all about. And in regards to that, I would like to pose a question to all of you, even if only one can answer, which is, it seems to me every time we talk about autonomous vehicles, we are adopting the private vehicle mode where I have an autonomous vehicle in my garage. And this is in direct conflict with the whole speech of multimodality that we have been hearing all through the session. But it is also true that autonomous vehicles can be public transportation, buses and minibuses, and they can be shared. And so is there any chance today that we merge the technological advances and the policy wishes that we all share to make them come together? And yes, I agree, this is going to revolutionize profoundly the way we move, but there is a huge difference between me calling Kitty to come home and pick me up, take me any place, or to pick my father who's ill, I cannot drive anymore, or a model where I can actually get engaged to walk to the nearest bus or metro station to go places. And we really need to make clear today what model we want to adopt so that all things come together in a nicer way. Else we'll be in the classic book of Who Ate My Cheese? We'll be all lost without knowing who did wrong when. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Please, the next point, just take the three and we react to them, please.
Hi, I'm Matt. I work for the New York City Department of Transportation. Karina and I were pitched the other day by Waymo and about basically asset management and how they don't really know what they're driving on. Is there a conversation sort of from a boring asset management perspective on how we can sort of get them to actually figure out what's on our streets in addition to all of the doom that they will bring? Thanks.
Thank you. So, Stacy, take a first attempt to answer. The general question is, do we really want these?
So that's really a personal decision that depends on somebody's emotional response to technology and their emotional response to their expectations of the services that those technologies will provide. As I believe Karina noted that, or maybe it was one of the others that, yeah, it was Karina in your city that about 30% of the people felt safe around their peers driving, and about 60% felt safe around the autonomous vehicles. It's where does that safety feel, and what does it mean about the human-to-human connection that I think maybe some of those comments are coming from, that technology can replace the sense that of humanity that we have in our cities. And so I think that's a really personal decision that I'm not going to answer. I don't think that we are going to be turning our backs on technology anytime soon, nor the benefits that it can bring. And I think we just need to be really savvy about how those technologies unfold. And I'm making a tiny bit of a pun with the word savvy, if you may allow me to answer the second question posed by, I believe it was Maria?
Yes.
I would highly encourage you all to take a look at the work put out by the city of Portland, Oregon. They developed an initiative called SAVVY, which is the Shared Autonomous Vehicles Initiative, or excuse me, Smart Autonomous Vehicles Initiative. And they have done some really interesting things as far as ensuring that those vehicles, as they enter their roadways, and that they have some control over how that happens, and that they're setting expectations for how that they're going to interact, and the goals to which they are to address, such as equity and economic health and environmental health and congestion reduction. And I think that that type of thinking and policy development is what we really need at the federal level and at all state levels, in order to make sure that we're setting expectations about the impacts these vehicles will have. The SAVVY initiative really connects a lot of dots between what the technology is and what its results are and how it's to be used. So has anybody heard of FAVES, ACES, CAVES?
Yes.
All right. Whole new acronyms. We're the transportation industry. We love acronyms. But ACES is Autonomous, Connected, Electric, and Shared. FAVES is the one that's used in Portland, which is fleet autonomous vehicles, and they're electric. But the idea is that if they're going to come, and if we're going to implement these in our rural and urban areas, they need to be electric, so that we can address our climate change issues and we can improve our air quality and all of those goals that we have associated with that. And they need to be connected and autonomous, but they need to be shared, because we are going to see a huge uptick in VMT if we allow empty vehicles to ride around waiting for us.
Well, that's an agreement there. There was a point before, David, there was a point in the first question that how come they ride in the public realm and there's no regulation on them? I just want you to have a reaction to that.
Yeah, so, but that we did have the level of control that the gentleman assumes that we do. The state of Pennsylvania has a categorization of cities which is very uncomfortable for me to acknowledge, but we have what we call first-class cities and second-class cities. And third-class cities. Pittsburgh, there is precisely one first-class city, which is the city of Philadelphia. There is only one second-class city, which is the city of Pittsburgh. Everybody else is third-class cities. First-class cities do have control over a great number of things within their cities. They have the ability to regulate taxi cabs. They have the authority to regulate any number of other things. Second and third-class cities are governed by the state. So the state of Pennsylvania which I'll suspend comment on state regulations, but is not necessarily of the most urban mindset. And so we do not, the city of Pittsburgh cannot prohibit access to transportation networking companies like Uber if we wanted to. Philadelphia could, Pittsburgh cannot. So we actually do have to allow them to operate. And so we do rely on sort of the social compact of if you are a business that cares about your customers, that cares about being here, you do have a social responsibility. And we do have the bully pulpit of being able to speak with a loud microphone or a megaphone about our feelings of those companies that don't actually look out for the public good.
Thank you. David, you got your answer in waiting, so go ahead.
Well, I just want to on this procrastination. I think it's something that people in public life should avoid doing is stop selling government regulatory roles short and thrashing yourselves too much. Actually, if you look in the automotive scene over the last 40 years, the biggest single success has been proactive regulation. A lot of it has been catch-up as technology advanced. Some of it has been technology forcing. And we're just too down on ourselves. It's the biggest single public health success in transportation has been, and it started with Ralph Nader in the 60s, has been the progressive regulation on safety of automobiles, also on emissions. It's ups and downs, there's lots of mistakes made and so on, but stop. Let's actually recognize that it's necessary. It overcomes market failures. I'm not being ideological about this. The people who are ideological are the ones who say, let's just strip away all the regulatory requirements.
No.
And there is a community out there who are already saying, with driverless cars, you don't need seatbelts, you don't need airbags. We can all sit around having coffee. And by the way, also there's a certain part of maybe the alcohol industry, so it's wonderful because they can get completely pissed out of their skulls and then still be taken home. There are people out there who are arguing that, and we should have the confidence to say, no, there are social priorities, and in a smarter way as possible, we will try and make sure we max them out. And so I really think there's a shared view about that, actually. One other thing I just wanted to say, the question was, what is actually going to happen? My hunch is mass private car use is going to be the last where we'll see this. I think niche public utility vehicle shared forms of transit are exactly the way to go, probably also with very carefully mapped predictable routes and road infrastructure, which, by the way, would also, it's all kind of traffic calming, if you like, in a different, will actually be beneficial for everybody. I can see that happening quite quickly. Maybe some commercial vehicles as well. Just finally, a rather personal point, there was an interesting discussion about this is going to be a massive transformation for the elderly. Well, yeah, it'd be great. Personal story, my mother is 94. She is still there, very active. She was a Wren, Women's Royal Navy in the Second World War. She learned how to drive trucks. She drove trucks full of torpedoes. Had to be a very
union member?
No, but she was a serving officer in those anyway, she had to drive trucks with torpedoes. She's a bloody good driver. You would be if you had torpedoes. She has reluctantly, but on her own, given up driving, which for her is a tragic sort of, she loves driving. She's given up driving voluntarily, not because she can't drive, it's because she has difficulties walking across the street to get in the vehicle. And she worries about getting lost in town when she's got out of the vehicle. It's her pedestrian mobility that's the nervous thing. And so when you think, and this comes to the employment opportunities, maybe this nirvana for the Musks of this world to actually let's get rid of all these jobs and make everything super efficient on a completely inhuman basis. Maybe what we should be talking about is social pods that run around where there is a steward or someone in there who does know how to manage the thing if there's something going wrong, may have to take over if it needs a bit of driving, but also can actually look after the people, help them get in and out, and all those sort of things. And I think I completely agree with a colleague here. We've got to rethink what we expect out of these systems and not allow ourselves to be basically controlled by sort of billionaire toy, boys with toys sort of culture.
Oh, yeah.
Which there is a terrible danger this debate is set by them.
Yeah, the difference between children, boys, and grown-ups like me is the cost of the toys. So I don't want this electronic vehicle to be the toy of the next autonomous vehicle to be the toy of the near future. I have a line of people, and probably you add your comment there, Stacy.
Follow up on David's for
Okay, please.
Just one side comment. You mentioned that having services that assist the elderly or disabled. Uber has actually begun Care More that is actually designed to do just that. So for anybody that's interested in researching these things, it's apparently reduced wait time by 30 to 40%. And so there's some, I think going that direction is a really good direction, and they are starting to go there, no matter what you think of Uber.
If they employ the drives properly. Please, Margarita. Nice.
Thank you very much. Very interesting conversation. I wondered, I would like to hear that.
Margarita
really...
from Hewlett Foundation.
Oh, yes, thank you. He knows me well. I'm really happy to hear that we're not ready, because I definitely don't believe we will have a software that can predict how humans behave in developing country cities. Like, I don't see in my lifetime an autonomous car in my home city of Bogota or in many cities that I travel in Africa and Asia. So definitely it's about how we prepare. But my question is about cost and workers. And to me, even in countries in the global south, we're like decades away from even seeing hybrid technologies, not even an electric car. I feel autonomous is going to be always as expensive. Like, people think, oh, they are going to reduce costs.
Just like cell phones.
Exactly. So I wonder if this consideration about the cost really has been touching all the externalities of what this technology will cost.
Well, we are very close to closing, but we have Juan Carlos Muñoz from Universidad Católica de Chile. Please, Juan Carlos.
Thank you, Darío. My question, I think that autonomous vehicles is one thing, but autonomous and connected vehicles is another one. And I think that we have focused most of our conversation on the safety issues, on the usability of autonomous, but I think it's connecting what's going to really change cities. Even though I agree that this is not going to happen soon, I think the issue of having vehicles being connected, it's a future that cities need to prepare. And that poses a lot of opportunities and threats that if you're not prepared, you will not be able to tackle them adequately. For instance, in the case of the opportunities, of course, you can have a much higher capacity. I can imagine, as you were saying, a much higher flow, maybe intersections, traffic signals won't be needed. But on the other hand, do you really, in a world that we're saying, oh, we would like to have fewer cars, to have like a wall of cars moving at maybe 30 centimeters away one from another at, let's say, 50 kilometers per hour? So our cities, do we need probably a much stronger regulation of what we would like to have in our cities? What kind, and how do we would address this? On the other hand, this allow you to really say, well, if in my city I want to have vehicles at most 30 kilometers per hour here, 50 there, you have now the chance that this is going to happen. So the opportunity for have a strong regulation of what kind of city you will have, what kind of streets you will have, it's around the corner, and I wonder if the cities are preparing for that.
Okay, and last intervention question.
Yeah, question. So I wonder if some of the tension that we heard between David and Karina is due to the fact that, well, I mean, I think we're actually all agreeing, but we're talking about different parts of the public sector.
Yes.
On the one hand, national regulators who have great analytical capacity, lots of knowledge. On the other hand, municipal policymakers who are starved for attention and won't come to deal with this until it becomes a crisis. And I guess the question is, given that we're confusing ourselves in this room about at which level we should be dealing with which aspects of the issues raised by this technology, how do we guide other people in choosing the right venues to appropriately regulate this technology?
Well, the questions raised may complete another session, and I was just asked to stop the full session. So I'm really sorry, because the intervention by Margarita, Juan Carlos, and the last one posed really interesting points that we need to take into account and push forward. But I want to wrap up the panel by asking the panelists what one word or 2, 3 words that are the first priority that we need to go forward, thinking thinking into autonomous vehicles, and I start with Stephen. Very short.
I'm going to take a liberty and kind of not answer the question, but
I'm very bad
make
moderator.
an aspirational pitch to the World Bank about the Sustainable Development Goals, and the one that doesn't feature so highly in sustainable mobility is number 8, which is about decent work, young workers, gender, full employment. So all of these questions have to be balanced against what sort of society we want. And it was very clear from the second question that automation isn't cheap, and labour is cheaper in many, many parts of the world. So we have to balance good planning, good regulation, good social responsibility to ensure that we get the future right for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Very good.
I mean, I think that where we really need to be putting our emphasis is, you know, we can't believe that the free hand of the market is going to end up really providing these great social goods that we want from this new technology. To Maria's point earlier, public transit is public because it's the thing that we've had in place that is really accessible to everyone, that serves everyone. It's very democratic, it's very equal. And we need to find ways to really focus this kind of technology, deploy this kind of technology to strengthen those institutions like public transit that we know are this very backbone of cities where we can be space efficient and we don't have streams of vehicles blocking pedestrians from one side of the street to the other. And so, you know, really finding those ways to deploy this technology in a very positive way to maintain, sustain, and expand and strengthen those institutions that we truly believe in and aid in the transition of sustainable workforce.
Go ahead.
Well, I think actually reducing car dependency, particularly in urban areas, is just full stop a good idea.
Okay. Next.
Okay.
Sorry, David. So I'll be quick. We need education at all levels of government, but we also need to communicate with the public and make sure that we're bringing them into this conversation. And we need to think about cybersecurity and data management and support ideas. I have not read the full bill, but like the smart communities, smart cities and communities bill. Again, there could be bad things in there that I don't know about, that is designed to enhance education in areas such as data management and cybersecurity, because we're currently at least 209,000 jobs short of employees in this.
Okay, so the session is closed, and we have some coffee, a break, and we will come according to the program, so it's shorter break. Thank you very much. Join me with an applause.